Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto turns into a fox during a full moon. Pre-timeskip, no Biju, Konoha is a village of ninjas who hunt demons. Naruto is a ninja with secrets. And tonight is the night of a full moon. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 13, Shadow Tides. Kushina headed for the greenhouse before there was even a hint of the coming sunrise. She'd developed the habit of not sleeping on the night of the full moon, and it was a habit that she didn't care to break. No matter how long she ended up living, she was set on keeping her habit going. It all began with Minato. When she learned about his secret, and saw how he survived on full moon nights, she replaced Jiraiya as his company. To keep him from pacing his moon-proofed apartment and to distract him from the temptation of taking a peek, she'd play board games with him, watch movie marathons with him, even make love to him sometimes, whatever it took to make the night tolerable. If there wasn't the risk of the moon changing him forever, those nights would have been nothing but fun. And then with Naruto, it had been her first clue. She'd been up for the full moon out of habit, and her newborn son refused to sleep. The next full moon it had happened again, and by the time he was 9 months old she was sure that he'd caught some of the curse. Her blood hadn't protected him the way that she'd been sure that it would. So she kept staying up for the full moon for her baby. At least my blood did give him some protection, though. When Naruto had been about 2 years old he'd gotten a peek at the full moon. Kushina had gotten roped into helping a cousin take care of her sick baby for an hour, and when she'd come back to Naruto's room he'd gotten the shutters pried open and there was a bizarre fox puppy waiting for her. She'd cried the rest of that night and into the morning, sure that she'd lost her son forever, that she'd have to find some way to take care of him like a pet because he was an animal now. But when the sun came up, he'd changed back and asked her why she was so sad. If only he could have just been a regular Hanyu, he would have been forgiven for that. She bit her lip and walked up to the greenhouse door. But no, Naruto just had to find the good silverware, the stuff made of real silver, and Arashi just had to find him and see those silver burns. Lights were on inside the greenhouse and the door was unlocked. Kushina frowned and hesitated in the doorway for a minute. Who was intruding in her domain? And at this ungodly hour? Kushina crept into the plant-filled glass shed and found an old woman. It was impossible to accurately gauge her true age. Kushina could only tell that the woman was old. Her hair was long and silvery, with half of it cascading down her back and the other half pinned up in a pair of buns. She wore plain, old-style clothing, a dark green yukata with minimal decoration. Her back was to the door so Kushina couldn't see her face, but she thought she recognized the back as that of the gardener who tended all the plants and tree on Uzumaki land. "Hello." The old woman paused in fussing over a few small pots of soil and turned around. There were crow's feet around her eyes and lines around her mouth, and had she been human Kushina would have pegged her age at somewhere in the 50s. On her forehead there was a diamond-shaped chakra seal that reminded Kushina of Tsunade. But her gray eyes were old, ancient even. This woman was much older than 50. "Oh, good morning, Kushina-chan," the old woman said with a pleasant voice that sounded deceptively young. "I was just setting up some tree clippings for Clan Hoshitama. I'll be done and out of your way in a few minutes." "No, you don't have to rush," Kushina muttered, shifting awkwardly near the doorway. The gardener woman was much older than Kushina. As the tender of Clan Uzumaki grounds, the greenhouse had likely been the old woman's turf long before Kushina had ever been born. And here Kushina had been hogging the building and likely made the lady's job more difficult for years now. Thinking about it made her feel bad. A little bit. "No worries, dear," the old woman smiled and turned back to the collection of small pots she'd been fiddling with. "I was nearly done, anyway." Kushina leaned back against a plant-cluttered tabletop and fidgeted with a lock of her long red hair. She watched as the old woman carefully planted cuttings from the decorative maple tree that grew at the heart of Clan Uzumaki land that would with proper care either become bonsai trees, or saplings for Clan Hoshitama. And she thought about the old woman, Tsunade, and Konoha. Basama. "There's no need to be so formal, dear," the old gardener chuckled kindly. "I'm no official clan elder, I just tend the plants. Please, call me Ba-chan." "Ba-chan," Kushina said. "Do you know any senju?" I did once, a long time ago, the old woman nodded and dusted crumbs of dirt from her hands. Why do you ask? Senjutsu Nade has a chakra seal on her forehead like yours. Oh. The gardener brushed her fingers over the diamond-shaped mark on her brow as if she'd forgotten that she had it and smiled. How nice. The woman hesitated for a moment. If I could ask a favor, could you tell me how Konoha is? It's been so many years since I was last there. Kushina was surprised at the request, but as the old woman had been so pleasant so far, and since there were so few people that she could talk to civilly for more than 5 minutes, she decided to share a few stories. She talked about the Hokage and his hat and his pipe and how one time his wife had chased her around with a rolling pin after she'd mistaken the Sarutobi house for the home of a snob merchant that she'd wanted bomb with paint balloons. She spent a good hour giving all her favorite restaurants glowing ratings and scathing reviews for all the places that she hated. She related crazy tales that involved all her old friends like Inoichi, Chauza, Shikaku, and Tsame. She lamented at how Mikoto and Obito were the only Uchiha that were real human beings, and Mikoto had married a cold-blooded bastard and Obito had died young and been screwed over posthumously. And that brought her to the subject of Minato, and as she talked about how wonderful he'd been and how much she'd loved him and what a great father he would have been, she found that she was crying and she just couldn't stop. Oh, Kushina-chan. The old woman pulled her into her lap and they sat on the dirt floor of the greenhouse while Kushina just kept on sobbing. If only you had been born centuries earlier, the old gardener sighed and rubbed Kushina's trembling shoulders. Then no one would have cared who you loved, and your wonderful man would never have become a werewolf because there were no werewolves back then. I'm so sorry, dear. Fatigued from her sleepless night and drained from her meltdown, Kushina drifted off to sleep with her head resting in the old woman's lap. Madara, the old woman sighed as the first rays of sunlight shone through the greenhouse's glass walls. Even so long after your death, your evil still lingers. Jiraiya sheltered under a building overhang as the drizzle slowly intensified into a heavy downpour. It was like being in rain country, except this was the island country of Whirlpool. If only the place had a more tropical climate, this assignment would have had plenty of potential fun on the side. There were 2 routes of investigation with this particular assignment. If he went to the land of rice paddies and looked into Oto, no matter what he found it would have been useful because no one knew much about Otogakure. If he went to the land of whirlpools and poked around Uzu's business, he could see what Konoha's supposed allies were doing playing with strangers. Adding personal reasons into the mix, Jiraiya decided to start in Uzu. Rain and lack of bikinis aside, it was not what he'd expected. Throughout Konoha's history, it had been rare not to have at least one Uzunin in residence as a sign of their alliance. But whenever Konoha had offered to send Konohan into Uzu, it would always be politely but firmly declined. From the moment of Uzugakure's founding, there had been only 5 occasions when representatives of Konoha had been allowed past the outer walls, the most recent of which had occurred more than a century ago. Jiraiya was not one to be deterred by history, and so the day that he had stepped off the ferry he'd walked up to the village gates and asked to be let in. The shinobi on guard duty had laughed themselves silly before telling him to beat it. 3 more days he tried to get in the legal way, with the same level of success. When he'd complained to some locals in a bar he'd found in the little port town that ran the ferries to the mainland, he'd been laughed at there too. Uzugakure wasn't like Konohagakure, no civilians lived among the ninja. The citizens of Whirlpool thought of it as normal. So long as their ninja did their jobs and kept the criminals and demons at bay, Uzunin could do whatever they wanted behind their walls. What a secretive bunch these Uzunin are, Jiraiya mused as he watched the rain fall. But there's more than one way to get into a village. Asking for permission was just a courtesy. The thing that bothered him most, on a personal level, was Kushina's silence. He'd written to her once about 3 years after Minato vanished, and again shortly after returning to Konoha to look after Naruto, but he'd received no reply. And as far as he was aware, she hadn't contacted a single friend in Konoha since she'd returned to her native land. It didn't seem likely that she was still angry over how people had reacted to Minato's secret getting out, certainly not by the time of his second letter. So was her mail being screened for some reason? Was she not allowed to respond? Was it a problem with the mail system itself? I'll find out what's going on soon enough, he thought as he stared out into the rain. His fingers brushed against a hidden pocket tucked on the inside of his red vest. I need to track her down anyway. I have something to deliver. Kenjiro grimaced at the taste of his tea and reached for the sugar to sweeten it. I really wish that my father hadn't died so young. And that my grandfather hadn't committed suicide. And that my great-grandfather quit the position of clan head. I really hate my job. It was so tedious and frustrating to deal with the heads of the other 9 clans of Uzugakure and then govern, or, at least try to govern, his own clan. He often wished that his village was set up more like Konoha, with a single clear leader like the Hokage who could keep the bickering and debating down to manageable levels in village meetings. But the laws of Uzugakure only permitted a village leader to be chosen in times of war, and the position was only temporary. If only I could quit. But he couldn't quit. He was already the youngest clan head in the village by several decades, and his children, to whom the position would automatically fall to, were even younger. None of his 4 sons were ready for such responsibilities. And his daughter was not in any way suitable. The Uzumaki man sighed deeply as he stirred the sugar into his tea and closed his stormy gray eyes. Utsuko, if only you were still here. His marriage, like the vast majority in Uzugakure no Sato, had been an arranged one. The wife selected for him had been Hoshitama Atsuko, a shy creature that had been pretty enough and had adored children. With his father's unexpected and very untimely death, Kenjiro hadn't had much time to get to know his bride. Nevertheless, they'd been fertile, even producing a set of twins. But, just as he'd really begun to grow fond of her, it had ended. I'm sorry Kenjiro, I just wanted Kushina-chan to get a little sister. The doctors had warned her against having another child so soon. 5 children in a decade was a lot for a kitsune. And her last pregnancy with Kushina had been hard. Utsuko had been advised to take a break, wait a decade. But she hadn't listened, and she'd kept their warnings from him. The result had been a stillbirth that had killed her. And to make it worse, the stillborn child that she'd killed herself trying to whelp had been another boy, not the baby sister that she'd wanted for her only daughter. Why? A sudden knock at the door of his study interrupted his bitter thoughts. It was rare that his thoughts weren't bitter these days, and he scowled at the sound. Yes. A visitor, Kenjiro-sama, one of the older Uzumaki who acted as servants, said through the door. Kaito of the Furukawa clan to see you. Send him in, and bring tea for him, please. As dark as his mood was, Kenjiro was intrigued. It was well after dinner and he wasn't expecting any visitors, certainly not any visitors from another clan. And he didn't know Kaito particularly well, so why the grandson of the Furukawa clan head was visiting him so late in the evening was a real mystery. Furukawa Kaito was almost 20 years older than Kenjiro, even though he didn't look it, but he was polite and apologetic as he was shown into the room. He was a black-haired man, liberally threaded with silver, with amber-colored eyes and a ragged left ear that looked especially awful when he was a fox. When he was human his hair hid most of the damage. In his early prime, he'd been one of the Uzunin who'd gone to Konoha as part of the alliance between their 2 ninja forces. After making his apologies for the lateness of the hour and once the tea had arrived, Kaito got right down to business. I received a letter this morning from an old friend of mine, Kaito said, removing a folded piece of paper from the inside fold of his dark gray yukata. I've already shared it with my grandfather, and the head of clan Hoshitama, and I think you need to see it, too. Kenjiro raised an eyebrow as he took the letter, opened it, and started to skim. It looked like a casual letter. But it wasn't. The seals stamped at the end of the page proved that it came from the desk of Konoha's current Hokage. And the content of the letter. Clan Kurohi will be the death of us all, I swear. Yudai jogged down to the basement of his grandfather's home. When he reached the chamber, his grandfather and father were already there and waiting for him. He bowed slightly in apology as he joined them at the low coffee table where they were nursing saucers of weak sake. Sorry, I was training and lost track of time, Yudai said as his father poured him some of the sweet rice wine. That's quite all right, his grandfather, Yuta, chuckled kindly. You've done a very good job, son, his father, Yuma, smiled proudly. We don't mind waiting a few minutes on you. But now that you're here, we can get started. Yudai nodded and took a sip of his alcohol. The trials in Konohagakure are only 2 weeks away, Yuta said, bringing them straight to business. While you were training, your father and I have already decided not to look for any genin teams to send this year. As we haven't sent any promising genin squads since that werewolf incident, there won't be any suspicion about it. Are you worried that they'll get in Oto's way? Yudai asked. Yes, and there is no need to send green little foxes to a village that we will shortly be destroying, Yuma replied. All we need is to select the shinobi we will send as a liaison. Not all of the clans are aware of our intentions, Yudai frowned. What if one of them pushes to have a genin family member compete in the trials? The chances of that are negligible, his grandfather scoffed. And should it happen, I'll bury their petition under debates and red tape. Now, as for our agitating liaison, I think I've found the perfect candidate, his father announced and pulled a folder out from under the table. Oh. Yuta tapped his fingers together. Who have you dug up for us? Kashoku of Clan Byakuchi. Not a Kurohi? Yudai asked uneasily. Clan Byakuchi agrees with our aims, his grandfather said. And, if I recall correctly, Kashoku is properly motivated. He is, Yuma nodded gravely. He was primarily raised by a grandmother who was traumatized by the Great Slaughter. The poor woman suffers regular nightmares and the very sight of weapons drives her into panic attacks. Needless to say, Kashoku hates demon hunters of all kinds. If he hates demon hunters, can he function the way that he needs to within the walls of a human ninja village? Yudai wondered with great concern. Kashoku is an excellent infiltrator. He is young, but he's already credited with taking down 3 attempts to set up drug smuggling rings in our country, one of which he did single-handedly by sowing mistrust between the criminals to the point where they attacked each other and all he had to do was a little mopping up. Yuma smiled slyly. I have great confidence that he can bury his hatred enough to perform properly, if not exceptionally. He is sharp and a talented improviser. I think he's perfect. We'll still interview him, of course, Yuta nodded, just to be sure. Yudai nodded slowly. Both his father and grandfather seemed satisfied with this choice, so there was little chance he could persuade them to pick a Kurohi. He would be much more comfortable if one of his trusted clansmen was on this task, but, if Kashoku completely screwed it up, Clan Kurohi could disown him as he was a Byakuchi. I see that we all agree, Yudai's father smiled and lifted his sake saucer. Now we are one more small step closer to the first of our major goals. Indeed, Yuta chuckled, raising his own drink. To the destruction of the leaf, and the eventual destruction of the ninja world. Yudai raised his saucer, toasted, and tossed back the rice wine. We will succeed where the Cuban no Yoko failed so miserably, Yudai thought as the conversation wound down onto more mundane clan business. Instead of lashing out at the aristocrats like he did, we'll destroy the warriors. When the human race is defenseless, it'll be easy to finish them off. Orochimaru slithered about his workshop, examining various vials and jars. What to bring, what bring. Konoha's trials were drawing closer and he needed to finalize his plans. He'd already selected some genin of his to enter into the trials. Now he needed to make up his mind on what things he wanted to test out. His serpentine eyes glittered as he studied a particular set of vials filled with a black fluid, and then he selected a few to slide into a leather pouch. Yes. One of his finest accomplishments had been the development of his curse seals. He'd been inspired by the virulence of the lycanthropy curse and had even used werewolf saliva as a base for his earliest work on it. Now, with information gleaned from scrolls shared by the Ozunin, he had found ways to further advance his curse seals, giving them a second level. Currently he was testing the upgrade on his young elite bodyguards, and hopefully after the trials he'd have a few corrupted Konohanin to play with too. Smiling coldly, he continued surveying his collection. There were poisons he could use, and a set of explosive tags that had the secondary effect of releasing a cloud of paralyzing gas. A snake in a specimen jar reminded him of the altered snake summons that he could call upon. And then he came to a particular vessel, a clay jar covered in suppression and containment seals. Ah, I almost forgot about these. Orochimaru chuckled and very carefully packed the jar up for transport. It would be a shame if I wasted this perfect opportunity to finally give them a test. Minato bit his lip as he perused a specific section of the Hokage's private library. For every summoning contract that was either bound to a bloodline or a student-teacher line in Konoha, there had to be a way for the Hokage to be able to contact those creatures directly as well. Skimming the labels of the scroll cubby holes, he'd so far spotted the summoning scrolls for the dog contract, the slug contract, the tapir contract, the monkey contract. Here it is. He carefully pulled the scroll for the Toad Clan out and carried it to a table where he unrolled it. Smoothing out the paper, he admired the chains of seal marks that formed the summoning circle. Ordinarily he didn't need a scroll to call upon the Toad Clan as he'd signed a contract with them in his own blood, but ever since he'd first fully transformed he hadn't been able to summon a single toad. That either meant that there was a block on his name, or his name had been erased from the contract. So he needed to use the Hokage's scroll to get in touch with them and sort things out. Biting his finger so that it bled, Minato performed the appropriate sequence of hand seals and slammed his hands down onto the scroll, shoving a finely molded spike of chakra into the summoning seals. Kuchi Yasei no Jutsu. There was a burst of white smoke and then the diminutive Fyokazaku materialized. Eh? What's this, Abu? The green-caped toad looked rather humorous with his large mouth hanging slack at the sight of Minato, but the blonde man didn't laugh. I'm terribly sorry if I'm interrupting something, Fyokazaku-sama, but I have a question, Minato said humbly. Humph. The old toad croaked as he regained his composure. You've got some nerve summoning me. Minato bowed his head in apology. I'm sorry if my condition brought shame upon the illustrious Toad Clan. Jiraiya-sensei was sure that there would be no conflict as I am not technically a demon but a cursed human. That is what he told us, Fyokazaku grunted, puffed out his throat sac. He took full blame for the idea. The demon toad lowered his bushy eyebrows thoughtfully. I must say, I'm surprised to see you, boy. As far as anyone knows, lycanthropy drives humans mad when they transform by moonlight. Not always, Minato smiled without any humor in it. I was fortunate. Had I been in just about any other situation when I first changed, I surely would have gone mad with the knowledge I had at the time. Oh. Fyokazaku grunted, tugging at the loose skin at his throat. I would love to explain, but first I was hoping to find out if my name has been removed from the contract. Removing a name from a summoning contract is tricky, the toad replied. We merely placed a block on your name. Were you hoping to have your summoning privileges restored? Only if it would not harm the reputation of the Toad Clan, Minato said. That would depend, Fyokazaku said after a moment's thought. I would need to consult the elders on the matter. And are you still a part of Konoha? We don't associate ourselves with rogues. I very much hope to return to Konoha's service, he answered. I think that Hokage-sama wishes for me to serve him again in some capacity as he allowed entrance into his library and use of his scroll to summon you. That is the plan, the Hokage said as he entered the library with a small cloth-wrapped object in his hands. With your returning health, I'm sure that you're becoming restless and I could always use more help. Hokage-sama, Minato bowed as the old man approached the table. If you were interested, I was hoping that you would re-enter Umbu for a time, Sarutobi said, unwrapping the object to reveal a ceramic animal mask. Minato had done a brief stint in Umbu before he'd taken students under the code name Falcon. Instead of a bird mask, the one that the Hokage offered him was canine with black markings, one of which looked suspiciously like a sideways crescent moon on the brow. He stared at the mask in deep thought for a moment. Ever since that one full moon, he'd felt that he'd lost his future, and he'd lost his purpose. It had been hard, drifting from place to place without any notion of where he was going or what he should be doing. He'd had no one to follow, no goals to work towards, no people to protect. He didn't just want to have some purpose again, he needed it. What would my code name be? Minato asked as he gingerly accepted the canine mask from the Hokage's hands. Most of the animal names are currently in use, so I was thinking of Mangetsu, the old man replied. Full moon. Fyokazaku snorted from his seat on the table. Minato smiled wryly. That's fitting, I suppose. I would very much be honored to rejoin your service, Hokage-sama, in whatever capacity you require. Thank you, Minato. The old man clapped a hand to the werewolf's shoulder. When you are finished meeting with Fyokazaku, Yamato will be waiting outside the library to help you get equipped and set up. The Hokage exchanged some pleasantries with the old toad, and then withdrew to attend to some other business. Minato studied the mask in his hands. He hadn't particularly enjoyed working in Umbu before, but it was something to do. Kushina was back in her own country and probably forever beyond his reach. And Naruto, he'd never meet. He'd never be Hokage, and would probably never be able to roam around Konoha again without this new mask. So all that he had left was this. Chapter 14, Into the Trials. Naruto dashed towards the academy building, cursing his alarm clock for coming unplugged so that he woke up late. Sasuke and Sakura-chan are going to kill me. Being late to class or team training was one thing, but being late for participation in the trials was something else entirely. All the way up to the week before, it hadn't looked like Team 7 was going to be entered in the trials. Then, at the very last minute, Kakashi-sensei gave them the permission slips they needed without any real explanation. Well, the Jonin might have explained something to Sasuke in private, but the Uchiha had looked humiliated and pissed off, so Naruto wasn't sure if it had anything to do with why they were being given the chance to enter the trials this year. Why the heck are we supposed to report to the academy for the trials anyway? The blonde boy wondered as he ran. Lecture classes are on hold for all school-age genin throughout the trials, so it's not a written exam, is it? Written exams were the bane of Naruto's existence. Whenever the pieces of paper were laid out before him and the clock started, his mind would blank as the questions overwhelmed him. Even multiple-choice tests were impossible as he always doubted the answers that he thought about picking. Oh, please don't let it be a written exam. Rounding a corner, Naruto almost stumbled into Sasuke. Watch it, the Uchiha boy grunted. Why are you so late? Sakura frowned, but then tossed out another question before he could answer. Did you remember to bring the permission slip? Naruto dug around in his pockets and almost panicked when he didn't immediately find the folded piece of paper, but then he grasped the crumpled up form. He smoothed it out and showed it off. Yeah, I got it. Signed and everything. Hurry up then, Sasuke muttered as he turned and slouched off towards the academy building 2 blocks away. We don't want to be late. Naruto stuck his tongue out at the back of Sasuke's head but followed along with Sakura. Team 7 entered the academy building and set off for the room number written on the permission slip. They came to a room with the number 301 over the door, the right number, but Sasuke and Sakura walked past it. Naruto was baffled. Hey, isn't that quiet? Sasuke hissed as they passed another squad of genin headed for the classroom. It's a genjutsu, Sakura explained. Look. And then Naruto noticed that all the other room numbers started with a 2 instead of a 3, which meant that this was the wrong floor. Well, Naruto frowned, shouldn't we tell? No, Sasuke said as they headed up the next flight of stairs. It thins the competition. If they can't spot a sloppy illusion, they don't belong in the trials. All right, Naruto muttered. That makes sense, I guess, but it's not very nice. This is supposed to be a test, Naruto, Sakura reminded him as they approached the real room 301. We're a team and we're only supposed to help each other. Room 301 was one of the largest classrooms in the entire academy. And it was filled with genin squads from Konoha and multiple lesser ninja groups, like Kusa, Taki, Aim, and Hoshi. Some teams were made up of genin the same age as Team 7, but most were older teenagers and even some young adults. The genin crowd milled around the rows of desks, so it was clear that the test hadn't started yet. Good, we're not late, Sakura sighed in relief. Sasuke-kun. A blonde ponytail almost smacked Naruto in the face as Yamanaka Ino latched onto Sasuke's arm. Ino pig. Sakura hissed furiously, glaring at her ex-best friend. I knew I'd see you here, I just knew it. Ino squealed in delight before casting a disparaging glance Sakura and Naruto's way. And you too, seeing as you're Sasuke-kun's teammates. If looks could kill, Sakura would have incinerated the bubbly blonde with her green-eyed glare. Ino, would you stop being troublesome? Shikamaru complained as he and Chuji slipped through the crowd to join with their female teammate. Hi Shikamaru, hi Chuji. Naruto grinned and waved. You guys are here, too. Asuma-sensei thought we were ready to try it, Chuji nodded cheerfully. Troublesome, Shikamaru muttered. Get off me, Sasuke growled as he tried to extract his arm from Ino's grasp. There was an excited bark and then Akamaru skidded into the group, bouncing up and down in front of Chuji. Hey, Chuji. Would you share some potato chips with me? I'm hungry. Akamaru. Kiba scolded as he caught up with his puppy. Don't run off like that. And stop pestering Chuji for chips. The Inyazuka blinked as he caught sight of his old classmates. Heh, so teams 7 and 10 are here too, eh? Shino, Hinata, check this out. Kiba's two other teammates weren't far behind the dog boy. One was a boy wearing a long, heavy coat with round shades. The other was an androgynous sort of individual with short dark hair and a shapeless beige coat. Naruto identified the boy with the shades as Shino, who he sort of remembered from class, but he wasn't sure about the other kid. Hinata could be a boy or a girl's name, and with the kid staring down at the floor, Naruto couldn't decide what gender the person was. Just so you guys know, Kiba said to them as he placed his scruffy puppy on his head. Team 8 is going to kick all your butts, so watch out. Sasuke grunted as he tried harder to shake Ino loose from his arm. Let him go, Ino pig. Sakura hissed as she tried to help detach the blonde girl from the Uchiha's limb. The three struggled for a moment before Sakura slipped backwards and crashed into someone. He was a Konoha genin who didn't look too much older than the rest of them. His black hair was trimmed into a shiny bowl cut and his eyebrows were so bushy that they looked like caterpillars. He was dressed in green spandex, with orange leg warmers, bandages around his hands and wrists, and a red cloth he tied for a belt. Who's this weirdo? Naruto wondered. Ah. The strange boy blinked his large, round eyes. Who are you? I'm Haruno Sakura, the pink-haired girl gulped as she regained her footing. I'm sorry that The mysterious stranger abruptly knelt before her and took her hands. A most fitting name for such a youthful and beautiful flower. He declared with shining eyes. I am Rock Lee. Lee rambled on and on in flowery language to Sakura about her beauty and how he wished to win her heart. Sakura stood frozen and pink-faced. Ino started snickering, and when she tried to quiet the giggles she just ended up snorting, like a pig. And everyone just stared. And should I fail, I will. Lee. A brunette girl with her hair done up into a pair of buns walked up to Lee and grabbed his spandex-covered arm. Don't disappear like that. Leave this poor girl alone and come on. But, the boy protested, Tenten. Save it, Tenten said sharply and dragged the lanky kid off. Neji-kun's waiting on us. We've got the trials to pass, remember. Barely a minute later, they were gone. Weirdos, Kiba snorted. I bet they're pushovers. No. The voice was so quiet and frail that it was nearly swallowed up by the muted chatter that filled the large classroom from all the other teams assembled inside. Neji-san's T-team is strong. You think they're strong, Hinata? Kiba asked. Whatever, we'll still kick their butts. The Hinata girl, Naruto was pretty sure that the kid was a girl now, still didn't look up from her standard blue sandals and fidgeted restlessly with her fingers. You should never underestimate an opponent, a new voice said, and all three teams of genin turned to find an older teen with glasses and silver hair in a ponytail smiling at them. I'm assuming that this is your first time undergoing the trials. What's it to you? Sasuke replied in quiet challenge. I've tried the trials every year since I've been eligible, the older genin said. I just thought I'd offer some friendly advice, seeing as we're all Konoha in here. My name is Yakushi Kabuto, by the way. Naruto tilted his head as he studied the older boy. He wants to give us advice? What sort of information could you provide us? Shino asked, speaking up for the first time. The tests change every year, so there's not much I can say about that, but... The older genin grinned and pulled a notebook out of one of his pockets. I like knowing everything that I can about possible human opponents, so I've collected information on all promising genin in Konoha and as much as I can find out about possible foreign participants in the trials. Would you like to hear about anyone in particular? Rock Lee and his team, Sasuke said before anyone else could speak up. All right. Kabuto flipped through the pages of his notebook before finding what he was looking for. Rock Lee's squad is a year ahead of you and has given up their number designation and is now called Team Guy after their sensei, Might Guy. They've completed an impressive number of missions for their age with a very high success rate. Miyagi Tenten specializes in weapons, Hyuga Neji is considered a genius in his family's fighting style, and Rock Lee appears to rely solely on taijutsu. From what I've gathered, they're the most promising team of their year. Whoa, really? Naruto blinked. That bushy-browed kid's team is that good? Really? Kabuto nodded and raised an eyebrow in Naruto's direction. What's your name? Naruto, the blonde replied. Naruto, what? Just Naruto. Odd, Kabuto remarked as he flipped through some of the back pages of his notebook. Ah, here we are. Team 7, led by Hatake Kakashi and comprised of Uchiha Sasuke, Haruno Sakura, and Naruto. You've done a lot of D ranks, and 2 C ranks, one with special circumstances. Interesting. Sasuke possesses an activated Sharingan and has some talent with basic Katon. Sakura has no notable clan connections and no specialty at this time, although she did place as the top kunoichi in her graduating class. And Naruto. Kabuto adjusted his glasses and looked closer at the page. No family information available, non-native of Konoha, affinities unknown, and rumored to be capable of a high-level bunshin technique. Naruto found himself rather unnerved at how much this guy knew about a bunch of genin not even a year out of the academy. Dude, are you some kind of spy? No, Kabuto chuckled at the blonde boy. I'm just very observant and thorough. The silver-haired boy flashed Naruto a friendly smile. You seem quite interesting, Naruto, I'll have to try and keep my eye on you. Naruto swallowed and tried not to shudder. Crap. Hey, Kabuto, are there any foreign teams we should watch out for? Shikamaru asked, sounding incredibly bored. Well, teams originating from the lesser countries tend to be better on average than Konoha teams. What? Kiba squawked, offended. Since the trials are held in Konoha, any Konoha team that qualifies can enter, Kabuto patiently explained. But the lesser villages have to be choosy in who they send. They can't afford to send all qualified genin teams, it would hurt their economies, so they only send the team or teams that they are sure that have the absolute best chance for winning Chunin rank. Kiba shifted in embarrassment. Oh. But as to your question, Kabuto said, turning back to Shikamaru, I'd be careful around the team from Oto. Oto? Sakura repeated questioningly. Oto is a newly formed lesser village apparently based in the land of rice paddies. This is the first year that they've sent a team to Konoha's trials. And since they're so new and so small. Kabuto adjusted his round glasses, looking a bit embarrassed. I really don't have any information about them at all. Huh, where are these Oto punks? Kiba wanted to know. Over there, the older genin said and pointed to a far corner. The trio of Oto genin stood so that they could eye everyone else in the room. They wore shades of purple and gray and camouflage-patterned fabrics with musical eighth notes on their hitaites. One of the boys just looked like an average sort of punk, while the second, boy, was wrapped up like a mummy in bandages, and the team's kunoichi had ridiculously long black hair. Geez, her hair's longer than Mom's. The Otonin noticed the trio of Konoha teams staring at them and made as if to approach. All right. A rough voice called out. Everyone bring their permission forms to the front and get your seat assignments so that the first test can begin. Chatter in the room practically ceased as the genin formed a rough line to the desk at the front of the classroom. Naruto tried not to sweat when he turned in the paper that Iruka had signed for him to a grim-faced scarred man dressed in a trench coat. A Chunin standing near the trench coat man gave him a seat number and Naruto scurried off to sit down. From what he could tell as the rest of the room was slowly seated, no one was sitting by their teammates. Naruto's desk was right up against the wall, and to his left sat Hinata, the dark weirdo girl from Kiba's team. When he craned his neck, Naruto could see that Sasuke was up in the back of the room, and Sakura was seated even farther away, almost up against the opposite wall of the classroom. What the heck is this all about? Naruto wondered with a rising feeling of dread. And then the Chunin assistants to the man in the trench coat started passing out papers and pencils. No. Not a written test. Wah. Naruto was so flooded with panic, he almost missed the man in the trench coat, the proctor for the first trail. He called himself Start Talking. He introduced himself as Marino Ibiki and rambled on about how dangerous the life of a demon-hunting shinobi was and how becoming a Chunin wasn't a game. When he removed his hitaite and showed them his bald head, which was covered in layers of scars, as a warning about how serious he was. Naruto was finally distracted from his test anxiety. Oh gross. Naruto shuddered as the man covered his head again. What the heck chewed on him? Now, if you are still determined to proceed and attempt to gain the rank of Chunin, we will begin with the first trial. When no Genin left the room, Ibiki went on to explain the rules. There are 9 questions you must answer within the 1-hour time limit, at the end of which you will be faced with the 10th question. If you cheat, or if you fail to answer all 9 of the questions before it is time for the 10th question, you will fail. And if you fail, your whole team fails. Ibiki set an alarm and placed it on his desk. Your hour has begun, turn over your test papers and start. With sweaty palms and trembling fingers, Naruto turned over his test paper and schemed the 9 questions. What the hell? We never learned this. It looked like advanced physics questions. One wanted him to work out how far a ball would go if thrown and contained information about drag, the force of gravity, and all sorts of angles. And another question demanded that he complete what looked like a complex chemical reaction. It went way beyond anything he'd ever seen in the academy. This is like college-level stuff. Naruto really started to sweat as he looked over the questions again and again, hoping to find something that he had some idea of how to answer. Out of the corners of his eyes, he could see everyone else diligently working on their tests as if nothing was wrong. It made Naruto wonder if there'd been some special class that everyone but him had taken that was allowing them to handle the test so easily. Despair started to press down on his shoulders as the hour slowly slipped away and his test paper stayed blank. Sakura was going to be so mad and disappointed. Sasuke was going to kill him. They were all going to fail because he was so stupid. Naruto would have tried cheating, but if he was caught, Team 7 would still get the boot. If he didn't put down some answers, his team would be shown the door. And he still didn't know how hard the 10th question was going to be. After all that trouble to get here, it's not fair. It really made him mad. It made him really mad. His chakra started to burn in the pit of his stomach and his fingernails started getting a bit sharp, so he ducked his head lower in case his pupils got slitted. And then the test paper seemed to change. The typed questions looked blurry. The air over the paper looked shimmery, almost like a heat-spawned mirage. What the? Naruto swallowed hard, sucked in his lower lip, and sharply bit down with one of his fangs so that he tasted blood. With the sharp sting of pain, Naruto blinked and found a completely different test paper sitting in front of him. It was easy. Stupid easy. The first question asked, what does 2 plus 2 equal? Naruto hurriedly answered all the questions, put down his pencil, flipped his test over, and cautiously glanced around as he relaxed and his subtle demonic features melted away. It was a genjutsu. Some kids had figured it out and were done like he was. But a lot of the other genin hadn't shaken the illusion yet. They just started at their papers blankly with unfocused eyes still lost in the chakra spondli. Man, I still have 15 minutes left. He'd never finished a test so early before, so he basked in the accomplishment for a while. Then he got bored, because he had a whole 15 minutes to wait before facing the mysterious 10th question. And then he noticed that the Hinata girl sitting next to him was still locked in the genjutsu. She looked even smaller and sadder than she had earlier as she sat curled in on herself, like she wanted to be invisible. Just watching her from the corner his eye made him feel bad. He wanted to help her, but... screw thinning the competition. Naruto decided as he fiddled with his pencil and then slipped it into his lap. If she fails, Kiba fails, and I wanna tangle with him later in the trials. Naruto fidgeted with his pencil for a moment longer, and then quickly jabbed the girl in her leg with the sharp end. The sudden pain snapped her out of her trance and she did a double take at her test. And then with badly shaking hands she hurriedly scribbled out her answers. And then a short eternity, for Naruto, anyway, later, the alarm went off, signaling the end of the hour. Everyone still locked in the genjutsu was released and then herded from the room. Any teams found to be short a member because that individual hadn't caught on to the illusion were also removed. And then all the tests were collected, Ibiki glanced them over, and then faced the much-reduced sea of Chunin hopefuls. Alright, now for the 10th question, he said ominously with a hard stare. Before I ask it, I must explain the special conditions. You have the option of answering it, or not answering it. If you choose not to answer the question, you must leave the room and the trials, but you will be welcome to try again next year. If you choose to answer the question and you answer incorrectly, you will fail and be forever barred from undergoing the trials. Simply put, you and your teammates will be genin forever. Ibiki paused to let the horrified genin chew over this information. Now, who will withdraw? Some hands went up immediately. Others slowly slipped up into the air. And as they and their teammates were escorted from the classroom by the Chunin helpers, Naruto got more and more steamed. This is crap. When Hinata's shaking hand started to lift from the desk in surrender, Naruto pinned it down, jumped up from his seat, and pointed an angry finger at Ibiki. Bullshit! Naruto declared. There's no way you stop someone from taking the trials again if they screw up your damn 10th question. You think so? Ibiki replied coldly. I am the proctor of this trial and Hokage-sama has given me permission to oversee my test and enforce whatever consequences that I wish. You're bluffing. Naruto insisted. And even if you could enforce your threat, I'd just become such an awesome genin that Hokage-sama would have to make me a chunin. Bring on your stupid 10th question, Dateba yo. Ibiki locked eyes with him for a moment longer before surveying the rest of the room. Well, are you all ready for the 10th question? When no other genin opted to leave the room, the man in the trench coat chuckled and sat on the edge of his desk. Very well, you all pass. You may proceed to the next phase. Naruto blinked. What the hell? One of the genin asked. There's no 10th question. That is correct, Ibiki nodded. There was no 10th question. It was simply a final test of your determination. A shinobi who does not have the drive to complete a hunt, no matter the potential risk, has no business trying to be a chunin. The more dangerous races of demons, and the hunters who have abandoned their villages in favor of lawlessness, will take advantage of any whose determination falters and... One of the classroom windows exploded, a smoke bomb went off, and when it cleared, a girl with purple hair in a messy bun was standing on Ibiki's desk. She wore a trench coat, too, but when she struck pose she revealed that she wasn't wearing much underneath it, just shorts and a fishnet shirt. There was a downright maniacal grin on her face. Hey there maggots! She cried gleefully. I'm Mitarashi Anko and I'm the proctor for the next trial. Hey! There's a lot of you left. Ibiki, you're slipping. And you're early, Ibiki shrugged. Whatever, Anko pouted. Come on you little genin worms, follow me. We're going to training ground 44. She leered at them. Let's go for a walk in the forest of death. Naruto swallowed hard. The forest of death? Byaku Chikashoku stared up at the massive open gates of Konoha Gakure no Sato. He looked to be a lean man in his late 30s with messy brown hair and ice-cold blue eyes. He was dressed in black with a dull gray flak vest, and his shinobi uniform was decorated in the blue spirals of his village. His hitayate dangled around his neck, a short sword dangled from his waist, and a stalk of grass dangled from his lips. He eyed the proudly displayed swirled leaf symbol over the gates and sneered. The Leaf Village, he thought scornfully. What a stupid name for something based in the land of fire. Leaves burn to ash in a second when exposed to a flame. He'd make this place burn. He'd set the butchers that lived here at each other's throats. And when the human monsters were busy gutting their neighbors, he'd burn the place down around their ears and smile. I'll avenge you, Oba-san. His grandmother, the sweet woman who baked cookies and cakes for the whole neighborhood, had suffered so horribly because of people like these Konohanin. She'd taken him in when he'd been just a tiny pup because of how badly his parents fought. She'd raised him up and loved him and been his everything. And every time she saw a large knife, saw blood, smelled blood, it would bring her right back to the killing and she would cry. And the nightmares, oh the nightmares that would make her scream into the night and wake him up even though she slept in the basement to try and be quieter. Soon, he thought to himself as he approached the chunin guarding the gates to sign in. Soon Oba-san, I'll make it right. I'll make it so that you can sleep at night. Chapter 15, Into the Forest. Hinata was a failure. She was a disappointment. She was worthless. So why had he done that? She'd noticed him before. 2 years ago, When he'd first been introduced to the class as a new kid, something quite unheard of, he'd been very conspicuous. But, instead of blending cleanly into the rest of the class after that, he'd kept doing things that stuck out. There were his attempts at catching up to his peers and all his spectacular failures at doing so. There were all his loud boasts and ridiculous declarations. There were his paint bombs and... "Hey, Hinata, come on!" Kiba called, making her jump. The room was emptying of the genin that were advancing to the next stage, and Hinata hurriedly got up and joined her two teammates, Kiba and Shino. She admired her teammates. Kiba was strong and his teamwork with his puppy, Akamaru, was amazing to watch. Shino was clever and his subtle use of insects made him a dangerous opponent. Even though they butted heads, they were excellent young shinobi with bright futures, and she felt so bad that she was always weighing them down. "I don't understand why father doesn't just seal me into the branch family and name Hanabi the heir to the clan," she thought as she followed her teammates out of the academy and towards the next trial. "The branch family is where I belong. Everyone knows it. It is my fate, as Nejina-san would say." Hinata grasped at her right hand with her left, where Naruto-san had touched her to prevent her from withdrawing. "He's a failure like me, only he was bright and loud where she was dark and quiet, so why does he still try?" Sakura was elated. The first trial had been a breeze. The genjutsu had been fairly obvious and she'd had no doubt that Sasuke-kun would have figured it out too, even if he didn't have his Sharingan. Naruto had been her only worry, but he'd pulled through. She could have done without his outburst at the end, but it was all in the past now. "I wonder what the next trial will be." Sakura brushed aside some long strands of her pink hair as she and her teammates followed all of the other genin. "It shouldn't be too much harder than the first one. I'm sure that whole forest of death thing was just to scare us." The line of genin trekked farther and farther away from the academy building, and the village itself. They passed training ground after training ground. And then after over an hour of jogging, they came to a fenced-off section of forest that had several different gates that she could see. "Here we are." Anko, the new proctor, cried gleefully. "Welcome to the infamous training ground 44. She pointed over to a table set up off to the side and manned by some chunin. "Hurry up and sign your waivers and collect your boxes so that I can explain what you maggots are supposed to be doing." "Waivers?" Sakura frowned. "We've already gotten our parents to sign permission slips. What do we need waivers for?" Some genin from Kusa actually piped up and asked that question. "The forest of death is a dangerous place and some of you will probably die," Anko shrugged casually. "These waivers are so that your villages or your families can't throw a fit if they get a corpse back after the trials." That killed all the whispers in the crowd of genin as they dutifully signed their waivers, and then each team received a small wooden box. "Everybody got their boxes? Break up into your teams." Once Anko saw that all the genin were clumped in their teams and listening, she smirked. "All right, this is a test of survival. At the heart of this training ground is a tower. You have 5 days to get your whole team there. Each team starts with a box given out at random. There are 2 kinds of boxes, and to gain entry to the tower a team needs to have one of each. So that means..." The young female proctor grinned fearfully. "You'll have to get the box that you don't have from some other team." Sakura glanced down at their team's box. It was made of wood and painted gray, except for a black dot on the lid. The box wasn't very big, it was a little larger than her palm, but flat and light. She thought about opening it, but the lid was taped to the box with seal-covered papers. "Now, if the 5 days pass and you don't make it to the tower, you fail. If you lose your box, or don't get the other box and go to the tower anyway, you fail. If you open any of the boxes, you fail. If you don't make it to the tower with the 2 boxes with your whole team, you fail. If you die, you fail." Anko put her hands on her hips and sneered at them. "Any questions? What are we supposed to do for food?" Choji asked urgently. "It's a survival test, kid," Anko snorted. "There's plenty of stuff to hunt down and eat in there, berries, roots, critters, mushrooms, just watch out for the poisonous stuff. Now any other stupid questions?" There were none. "Okay." Anko pumped her fist. "Each team will be escorted to a gate. At the signal, the gates will open, you little snots will go inside, and the test will start. Okay Chunin helpers, start escorting. Within 10 minutes, Team 7 was following some 20-something Chunin towards their assigned gate. Sasuke looked intensely focused as they neared their entry point, and it made Sakura's heart flutter a bit. Naruto seemed a bit more subdued than she would have expected, with his eyes flicking towards the high wooden fence that sealed off the testing ground every few minutes, but when he caught her glancing at him the blonde boy flashed her his stupid foxy grin so she knew he was really okay. And then, when they reached their gate, Sakura blinked to find Kakashi-sensei standing nearby. Oh, the masked Jonin blinked his one eye as he peered up from his little orange book. So you survived the first phase. Good for you. Kakashi-sensei. Sakura eyed the Jonin curiously. What are you doing here? How'd you get here on time? Naruto wanted to know. Just wishing you luck, Kakashi said, half closing his book. And I can be on time when I want to be. Considering the difficulty of this test, if I was late, I might never see you again. Sakura shivered. This place isn't that bad, is it? Of course it is, the Chunin that had escorted them snorted and gestured towards the fence that surrounded the special training ground. That's not meant to keep things out, it's meant to keep them in. The pink-haired girl clutched their team's box with white knuckles. I guess that Kunoichi wasn't exaggerating when she called this place the Forest of Death. Remember Nami no Kuni and you should do fine, Kakashi-sensei advised them cheerfully. And then a horn sounded, the Chunin opened their gate, and the test was on. Naruto dashed into the training area first. Sasuke was hot on his heels. Sakura stumbled after them on wooden legs. If this place is anything like Wave Country, we're going to die. A trio of young adult Kusunin darted through the immense trees of the infamous Forest of Death. And then there were only two. When the two boys realized that their icy female comrade had vanished, it would take a while, they weren't terribly friendly with each other, they looked for her as they couldn't advance through the trials a teammate short. They had no idea that she was already dead. Something that appeared to be their lost teammate stealthily slipped through the training ground. When it was in a quiet patch of forest, the figure stopped and removed a container from its loose, pale robes. The thing removed the numerous seal papers from the clay jar, opened the lid, and then poured out the contents onto the earthen ground. It looked like shiny black tar, but it quivered like gelatin. Then the slimy thing divided itself into small, slug-like shapes. And the black chunks of slime slowly slithered off in all directions. The thing that had been the Kusa Kunoichi smiled wicked and licked its lips with an overly long tongue. Excellent. With that little task completed, the Kusunin strolled off deeper into the forest without a care in the world. It hadn't come here to compete in the trials, so it wasn't terribly concerned with this part of the tests. It was far more interested in testing the current crop of genin and visiting a notable landmark or two before it had to leave. Konoha would eventually search for the lost Kusa Kunoichi, even if it was just to return a corpse to Kusa no Kuni. But they wouldn't find anything. And it wouldn't be all that unusual. Every few years a genin vanished in this place without any trace. The Leaf Village would just think that this was more of the same and never consider that the girl had died before ever having walked through the village gates so that a snake could wear her skin. Jiraiya sat on the docks of the port village nearest to Izugakure and watched the seagulls wheel and cry overhead as he ate his lunch. He hadn't gained entry to the Uzunin stronghold yet. Every possible entry point that he'd found was either watched or well secured against intrusion. He had a plan for slipping through, but that had been put on hold until recently. Rumors of civilians disappearing had reached his ears and he'd looked into it, thinking there might be some human traffickers preying on the island nation. But that wasn't what he'd glimpsed a few nights back. That night he'd happened to spy shadows, Uzu's version of Umbu, gathering up a few drunken civilians wandering around the fringes of town and forcing them into a boat. Jiraiya had followed them by Demon Toad until the Shadow's boat passed through a barrier set up around a small, rocky, offshore islet where Jiraiya couldn't follow. Those intoxicated young men had yet to be seen again. Now the Toad Sage really had to get inside Izugakure and find out just what the hell was going on behind their walls. Uzu's weak point was food. The village residents needed to eat, and since they didn't grow many vegetables or fish, they had to buy it from the surrounding civilian villages. Carts carrying food would travel to Izugakure every morning, Uzunin would briefly take control of the horse-drawn carts to bring the goods within the walls and unload them, and then the carts would be given back to their owners and the civilians would leave. That's the way in, Jiraiya nodded to himself. They search those carts for stowaways, but they won't care about a little toad. I just need to find one small enough and ordinary-looking enough. Sasuke chased after the idiot, Naruto, who was running headlong into the forest of death with no direction and no plan. He glared at the moron's predominantly orange attire and wished that Naruto had decided to wear something less eye-catching for once. With a flashy idiot and an annoying, weak fangirl, Sasuke knew that it wouldn't be long before some other team tried to prey on them for their bucks. His unhappy mood was further soured by Kakashi-sensei's little send-off. Seeing the silver-haired Jonin reminded him of what he'd learned about Team 7's entry into the trials. Just thinking about it made him grind his teeth. Sasuke, Kakashi-sensei said as he pulled the boy aside after handing out the permission slips. Should your father gloat when he sees you have this form, kindly inform him that his attempts to pressure me into entering Team 7 had no influence over my decision. To hear that his father had felt the need to try and help him get into the trials was humiliating. His father had so little faith in his ability to impress his own sensei that he had gone out of his way to try and twist Kakashi's arm. It undermined all of Sasuke's efforts to impress his dad and prove his worth. This fact, and Kakashi-sensei's unwitting reminder of this fact, made Sasuke very, very irritable. The second that Sasuke got ahead of Naruto, he took the orange-clad moron's legs out and brought their run to an abrupt halt. What the hell? Naruto squawked indignantly from his sprawled position on the dirt. Shut up. Sasuke snapped. Enough running around, we need a plan so that we can advance to the final trial so that I can get promoted and get away from you. Naruto was taken aback by his statement, but only for a moment. There's nothing wrong with me or Sakura-chan. The blonde insisted, leaping to his feet. And even if you get promoted, who's to say it'll get you away from us, huh? It will, and there's a lot wrong with you, Sasuke retorted. Now, we need to. Who said you were the boss? Naruto angrily demanded. Without Kakashi-sensei here, I'm the only one at all qualified to make decisions, Sasuke snorted. I'm not that stupid. Naruto insisted. And Sakura-chan's as smart as you are. So? Sasuke sneered. She'll go along with whatever I want. She's a fangirl, she'll do whatever she thinks will please me. Bastard. Naruto snarled, obviously not having any better comeback. You know, a bastard technically is a child born out of wedlock or a child of questionable parentage, Sasuke blandly replied. My parents are married and there's no doubt that they are my parents. What about you? Naruto was rendered speechless for a blissful few minutes while the boy glared and trembled. Now that you've shut up, Sasuke grumbled, we need to find some advantageous position where we can ambush other teams. Picking a spot near the tower would be best, it's a choke point. Any team that heads for the central tower is likely to have both of the required boxes and... The dark-haired boy had to cut himself off as he dodged from Naruto's angry swing. You think you're so great because you're an Uchiha? Naruto hissed. Because you have those fancy eyes that let you learn jutsu and kick ass in a snap. But really, you're just a spoiled brat. You have everything and you're still not happy. Sasuke sneered at the idiot. He was most certainly not a spoiled brat. He didn't wear fancy clothes or live in an enormous mansion or spend money like water. He was never left wanting, sure, but he had never been overindulged by his parents. Either. And he most certainly didn't have everything. He didn't yet have the skill and strength to surpass his older brother. Nor did he have his father's respect and love. The way things were going, it felt like he would achieve the former long before the latter. What makes you think I have everything? Sasuke challenged. What would you know about my family? You were born in this village, you have a clan, you have a family, you have an older brother, and you have a mother that loves you, Naruto listed without hesitation. What else could you possibly need to be happy? My father doesn't think much of me, Sasuke bitterly admitted. I'm just a useless second son after my genius brother. I need to earn his respect. From what I've heard about him, your dad sounds like an asshole, Naruto remarked. You'd probably do better without him. Sasuke so red. In a flash he had Naruto by the collar of his garish orange coat and slammed the idiot's back up against the trunk of a gargantuan tree. He glared at the blonde with the full force of his unbalanced Sharingan. "Don't you dare insult my father. He's the greatest man that I know. To make him proud of me is my greatest dream." Yeah, Naruto grunted and tried to wriggle free from Sasuke's grip. "That's what you said when Kakashi-sensei had us introduce ourselves on day one." Sasuke growled as he kept on glaring. And then a thought occurred to him. "You're just jealous that I have a dad and you don't." Naruto blinked, and then he laughed. "What's so funny?" the Uchiha demanded. "Why the hell would I be jealous?" The blonde sniggered. "I don't need a dad. I don't want a dad. Ever. If I could have been born without one, I would." Such a way of thinking was unfathomable to Sasuke. What boy didn't want an awesome father to look up to and seek to impress? The only reason he could see for such a dismissive attitude towards fathers was, just because your mom slept around too much to be able to say who your father was doesn't mean. Naruto's hand was around his throat and Sasuke couldn't breathe, let alone finish his sentence, and the blonde's eyes, the pupils were slitted like a snake's or a cat's. "Don't you dare say anything about my mom ever again, you rotten bastard." His eyes, that's no genjutsu, my Sharingan would see through it. Sasuke let go of Naruto's jacket and tried to pry the hand off his throat, but that only encouraged the other boy to squeeze tighter. Whump. Naruto went stumbling off to the left from a fist to his jaw. Whack. Sasuke dropped to the dirt, gasping for air and clutching at the back of his head. "Stop fighting," Sakura demanded in a quavering voice. "Just stop it." The Uchiha peered up at the trembling Kunoichi, dazed. "She hit me? She actually hit me? Could she be some imposter?" "Ever since we made it back to the village after Wave Country you've been fighting," the pink-haired girl claimed. And from what I've seen, it's mostly Sasuke-kun's fault," Sakura admitted with shame, as if it was somehow her fault that her idol failed to live up to her fantasy. "It's tearing us apart. We were a team in Wave, and that's part of how we made it out alive. Kakashi-sensei said that we have to be like that again if we want a chance of making it through here to the next trial. So both of you, stop it." Sasuke just stared at her with his Sharingan trying to see through the henge because this couldn't be Sakura because that annoying girl would never hit him. "So long as the bastard behaves himself, I won't fight with him, Sakura-chan," Naruto promised. The girl sighed at his answer and turned to the Uchiha. "Sasuke-kun, what about you?" "I suppose I can hold off kicking the dead last's ass until later," Sasuke grunted as he massaged his throat. "Sasuke-kun." Sakura shook her head and pulled the box out of her kunai pouch. "Did either of you see the other team's boxes?" "No," Naruto said sheepishly. Sasuke studied the gray box with the black circle painted on the lid as he deactivated his Sharingan to preserve his chakra. Some of the other boxes being handed out had white circles. "So we're seeking a white box," the girl nodded to herself. "This test is like a mission, and our objective is to obtain a white box without losing our black box within the 5-day time limit." Sasuke grunted. "Why must she restate the obvious?" "For the dead last's benefit perhaps." "Sasuke-kun, your strategy for getting the white box is a good one, but to maximize our chances of success I think we need to be flexible," Sakura said, her voice gaining some strength. "We need a fallback plan if there's no good place left by the tower to set up an ambush, or if time is running out and we haven't snared anyone." "That's a great idea, Sakura-chan." Naruto grinned. Sasuke rolled his eyes. "We could use Naruto as bait to draw in other teams. Who wouldn't want to take on an idiot that wears orange all the time? He's an easy target." "Bastard!" Naruto hissed. "Shut up before I hit you both again," Sakura threatened, cracking her knuckles. "That sounds like a last resort tactic, Sasuke-kun. Another plan B would be better. And what are we going to do about food and water? If we end up spending most of the 5 days out here we'll need to have something to eat and drink." She had good points, though Sasuke wasn't about to admit it and give her the mistaken idea that he was complimenting her. If she thought he was complimenting her, it might fuel her vain hope that he might magically fall in love with her, which would never happen. So he got up, dusted himself off, and started walking deeper into the forested training field. "Let's discuss this as we walk," the Uchiha grunted. "The longer we just sit out here arguing, the more we look like targets." Naruto tried not to fidget as he and his team crept through the forest of death. They'd been scouting around for a good place to camp and ambush for a couple of hours already. Aside from a few close calls with teams that they weren't ready to engage yet and a few minor run-ins with oversized wildlife, they hadn't done much else. This forest wasn't at all like the forests he was used to. The trees were incredibly massive. There were bugs crawling around that were the size of cats and dogs. And the air, there was something about the air, how it tasted, how it smelled, how it felt on his skin that unnerved him. "I don't like it in here," he decided. "It's creepy as hell." To try and distract himself from the general creepiness of the place, Naruto glowered at the red and white Yukawa fan stitched on the back of Sasuke's shirt. He really didn't like Sasuke right now. The spoiled brat had pushed all his buttons and Naruto had almost given himself away. Naruto really couldn't understand why the Uchiha wasn't at all grateful for what he had. "I don't see what the big deal is about dads," Naruto scowled. "Sasuke has a mom and a big brother. He shouldn't need anything else." Mothers were vitally important. They grew and gave birth to children, took care of them, raised them up, loved them, and protected them. Fathers, in contrast, were only needed to get the mothers pregnant in the first place, and then could just disappear with no harm done. "If I were Sasuke, I'd just worry about making my mom happy with me. His dad's an asshole, so I'd just forget about him. And his brother, it would be nice to have a brother." Naruto had met all sorts of people between the time with his mother and the time he'd lived in Konoha. He hadn't encountered many shining examples of parents in the homes that he'd stayed in. But he'd met other foster kids, some of them with siblings, and he had a good idea of how their relationships worked. Sometimes they'd annoy each other or beat each other up. But most of the time siblings would look out for each other, defend each other if they could. Brothers and sisters were there for each other, especially when it counted the most. He wished he had that. A brother would have been nice. Naruto tore his glare away from Sasuke's back to stare at the dirt under his blue sandals. Or even a sister. But he didn't have siblings. All he had was his mother. And he needed to get strong enough to save her. "I need to focus," he reminded himself sternly. "I need to pass these trials and become a Chunin. I need to be stronger, and if becoming a Chunin gets me away from Sasuke and his bastard Yness, all the better." And then Naruto crashed into Sakura's back. "Hey, what the?" Then he saw the thing that had stopped Sasuke and Sakura in their tracks, and his jaw hit the ground. What the hell? That's it for part 5. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.